G'day and welcome to Reality Check. Before we start this week's show, a little bit about this week's sponsor. Dr. Stephen Gundry is sharing his findings about a potential toxin that's in many of the, quote, healthy foods that some scientists push us to eat. They may actually be causing digestive issues for millions of people worldwide. Warning signs including weight gain, fatigue, digestive discomfort and stiff joints, even skin problems. And Dr. Gundry says these signs, these side effects, are often mistaken for normal signs of aging. You just have to know which foods are actually healthy and which contain this hidden potential toxin. He's put together an informative video you can watch at gutcleanseprotocol.com/Ross. That's gutcleanseprotocol.com/Ross. We're going to link to it below the video, and again, that's gutcleanseprotocol.com/Ross. Okay, now let's get on with the show. G'day and welcome to this special election edition of Reality Check. I'm Ross Coulthart and we're in the final days of the 2024 presidential election campaign. And of course, the issue everyone's thinking about, of course, is UFOs, or at least that's what Donald Trump is saying. Donald Trump has been telling people in recent interviews, including Joe Rogan, that one of the questions he's being asked about the most on the campaign trail is the mystery of UFOs, unidentified flying objects, or as we more politely call them these days, unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAPs. So I thought in the run-up of the final days of the election campaign, it'd be a good idea to look at the two candidates and see where they stand on UFOs, UAPs, and also to have a look at the history of the subject with presidential candidates and presidents going back in the past. So let's start with what the official government position is on UAPs. And the Pentagon officially has said in March this year there is no evidence that the US government or any private companies have reversed engineered extraterrestrial technology, nor are there any confirmed sightings of UAPs having alien origin, and this all contradicts multiple whistleblowers, including David Grush and Lou Elizondo and Christopher Mellon, who've said there is evidence being held secretly by the government of UAPs, of an NHI, a non-human intelligence presence on this planet. It all sounds like some wacky conspiracy theory, but as I found when I went digging back in the archives, there's been an extraordinary amount of candour amongst presidential candidates and presidents, and the subject of UAPs doesn't deserve to have the stigma and taboo that's attached to it. So in that context, let's start with what I think is probably one of the seminal moments in politics on the subject of UFOs. So in 2007, NBC's Tim Russert asked a very curly question of a Democratic presidential candidate, Dennis Kucinich. And he was asked, this is a Cleveland Democratic representative, Dennis Kucinich, he was asked, had he ever seen a UFO? And Tim Russert was very well informed because Kucinich answered honestly. And Russert said, Shirley MacLaine, it's always Shirley's fault, she's the one. How is it that an actress, by the way, can ask and admit that she knows about UFOs and she's had encounters with UFOs and nobody gives her that much of a hard time? But if a presidential candidate admits it, they get vilified. Russert asked, Shirley MacLaine writes in her new book that you sighted a UFO over her home in Washington state, that you found the encounter extremely moving, that it was a triangular craft, silent and hovering, that you felt a connection to your heart and heard directions in your mind. Now, did you see a UFO? Russert asked the presidential candidate. And boy, did Dennis Kucinich squirm. After a while, he answered, I did. And the rest of the account, it was an unidentified flying object. Okay, it's unidentified. And the rest of his answer was quite disastrous. But I believe Kucinich answered honestly. But what's interesting is what happened to Dennis Kucinich. His political campaign was destroyed from that moment. And from that moment, the whole notion of a political candidate admitting any kind of an interest in UFOs, UAPs, became political poison. It's one of the most iconic moments in presidential campaign history for how to lose a presidential election. And that's really sad because, as you'll see today, there's been quite a lot of admissions by multiple presidents that they have in fact engaged with the UFO subject, and in some cases they've even seen UFOs. And as anyone with half an eye on the subject in the last few years knows, there's been a series of admissions building since the 2017 New York Times stories by Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, which revealed the existence of a secret UAP UFO investigation program inside the Pentagon. And this culminated very much in a decision in a report made by the Office of Director of National Intelligence in 2021, where it was formally admitted, basically, that UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena, are real, and that they do pose a potential flight safety risk and a threat to national security, a potential threat to national security. It doesn't get any more clear than that. And the thing that frustrates me as a journalist is why the rest of the mainstream media don't wake up and realise the significance of that ODNI admission. I think in the context of all of this, we also need to acknowledge that in this particular election campaign, there's been a huge social media activist movement spearheaded in part by civil rights attorney Danny Sheehan and veteran social issues campaigner Jim Garrison through their New Paradigm Institute. And they were lobbying for questions to be asked about UFOs, UAPs, in the several presidential debates. And of course, those questions weren't asked because of the cow-towing, lick-spittling, grovelling, total toady mainstream media types who allow themselves to be so egregiously and shamefully manipulated by what has been a multi-decades-long Pentagon and intelligence community-driven cover-up to conceal the fact that the government knows a damn sight more about UAPs, non-human intelligence, than it ever cares to admit. So what is the position of both presidential candidates in the run-up to this Tuesday's presidential election? Well, let's start with Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris. And let's, to be honest about this, say very, very quickly that her position on UAPs is a big, fat nothing. The White House under Joe Biden has, of course, made a number of statements, and most of the more interesting statements came at the time of the alleged UAP shootdowns in February 2023, when there was a mass public hysteria about a balloon from the Chinese government that was flying across the continental USA. No explanation, of course, for the remaining 3 unexplained objects, one of which I'm very, very sure was anomalous. But in the course of the government commentary about this, the White House press secretary said on the 13th of February 2023, there is again no indication of aliens or extraterrestrial activity with these recent takedowns. Wanted to make sure that the American people knew that, all of you knew that. And it was important for us to say that from here because we've been hearing a lot about it. And yet, a lot of people in Congress aren't buying it. Jake Kirby, the National Security Council spokesman, again on the 13th of February 2023, he was asked specifically about the issue of UAPs, and he gave a very kind of bland, vanilla commentary about the subject of UAPs. He said, the President instructed the intelligence community to take a broad look at the phenomenon of UAPs. Indeed, President Biden conducted the first ever daily intelligence briefing devoted to this phenomenon back in June 2021. He was briefed that this is not just an issue for the United States, but one for the rest of the world. And as I said, our friends and our partners are dealing with this as well. We've worked on a bipartisan basis to stand up an office in the Pentagon to study this in partnership with the intelligence community, academic community and private sector. These unidentified aerial phenomena have been reported for many years without explanation or deep examination by the government. President Biden has changed all that. We are finally trying to understand them better. Well, what a load of BS. That's completely untrue. The simple fact is that the role of the Pentagon's ARRO office, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, has been to maintain the cover-up. They have willfully, actively ignored whistleblowers who've come to them with very direct, first-hand information that deserves fuller investigation. So let's have a look at, we'll get to Trump. I'm saving Trump for later, former President Trump. We all know that multiple presidents, at least Obama, Clinton, Reagan and Bush Sr. were all briefed on the UAP subject because each of them has made admissions, or people close to them have made admissions that they were briefed. President Clinton has actually admitted sending one of his very senior counsel, a guy called Webster Hubbell, to investigate UFOs and who killed JFK. And Webster later wrote in a book that, quote, he'd looked into both but wasn't satisfied with the answers I was getting. And that's pretty much what President Clinton has said about his efforts to get to the bottom of the UAP mystery as well. In 1995, when Clinton was in Ireland on a tour, there was a little boy called Ryan who'd asked him about Roswell, the alleged landing of alien craft in 1947 in New Mexico. And President Clinton went to great efforts to say in front of a huge crowd, as far as I know, an alien spacecraft did not land in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. And Ryan, if the US Air Force did recover alien bodies, they didn't tell me about it either. And I want to know. And I can tell you that was a very pointed and quite deliberate comment by President Clinton, because he really did want to know. He was very well briefed, I understand, about what had been going on, and he did make a very genuine effort to get to the bottom of the mystery, but he was thwarted, actively blocked from finding out much more about what's really going on. It is my contention that President Clinton was willfully obstructed by people in the Pentagon and the intelligence community from learning more about a covert retrieval and reverse engineering program of non-human technology. Think about the implications of what President Clinton said to that little boy in Ireland in light of what Lou Elizondo said to me on NewsNation just a few months ago. Lou went on the record, a former Pentagon UAP investigator with top secret SCI clearances, went on the record and actually admitted that he knew Roswell was the real crash of an alien spacecraft. He apparently was cleared within his DOPSA, within his Defence Office pre-publication security review permissions, to reveal that Roswell was indeed the crash of an alien spacecraft. So either Lou Elizondo is lying or has been misled, or the President of the United States was misled by whoever it was had told him that there was no evidence that Roswell was the crash of an alien spacecraft. Think about that. This is the Commander-in-Chief of the United States at the time being willfully thwarted by people in the defence and intelligence community from learning the truth about a seminal incident in human history, a first contact between humans and non-human intelligence. And mark my words, the public are going to find out, I suspect, very, very soon that the President was lied to, and multiple presidents have been lied to. President Carter, who had his own UFO sighting before he became president, pledged in his original presidential campaign, "One thing's for sure, I'll never make fun of people who say they've seen unidentified objects in the sky. If I become president, I'll make every piece of information this country has about UFO sightings available to the public and the scientists." Now, of course, President Carter did not honour that pledge when he reached office. the UFO secrets stayed hidden. But what we do know is that Danny Sheehan, who now, of course, I've mentioned previously, is leading a global disclosure activism effort to expose the UAP mystery. Danny Sheehan was hired as part of a congressional research investigation to actually find out what it was that the government knew about UFOs. And he has testified that he was given access as part of that presidentially authorised investigation to look at hitherto unreleased Project Blue Book files, which he says showed US soldiers recovering an alien spacecraft. Now, that photograph, of course, has never been made public. We've never been able to verify Danny's claims. But what's very, very interesting is nobody has ever denied it either. It's a really curious situation we have here, that President Carter was determined to get to the truth of the matter, asked for an inquiry, was initially allegedly knocked back by George Bush Sr. when he was the head of the CIA, the director of the CIA. And so he asked for a Congressional Research Service inquiry to be organised by a woman called Marcia Smith. And it was Marcia Smith who brought Danny Sheehan in. And it's Danny Sheehan, a civil rights attorney of some renown, who says that he was given permission to access enormous numbers of UFO files which have never been released to the public. And these included the photograph or photographs of this retrieval of an alien spacecraft. I find that incredible, and I find it amazing just how willfully ignorant a lot of the mainstream media are about following up leads like that. So that's President Carter. Ronald Reagan, of course, also had his own encounter with a UFO in a 1974 plane flight. And the pilot that night, a guy called Bill Painter, later described the object trailing their plane. He described how it took off at a 45-degree angle at a huge rate of speed. It just disappeared. Quote, "Everyone on the plane was surprised. The UFO went from normal cruise speed to fantastic speed instantly." And President Reagan apparently later described how the object, quote, "went straight up into the heavens." Whatever it was, it certainly caught Ronald Reagan's imagination, because Reagan often talked about aliens. He was very open about the possibility or the likelihood of there being aliens engaging with this planet. And he's, of course, very famous for asking his Soviet counterpart, Mikhail Gorbachev, during a Swiss arms control summit, "What would you do," he asked Gorbachev, "if the US were suddenly attacked by someone from outer space? Would you help us?" And President Gorbachev answered, "No doubt about it." And Reagan apparently said, "We too." And I think Reagan was fascinated by the idea that a threat from outer space by a non-human intelligence would bring humanity together, that we'd forget our differences and think of ourselves more as humans. And he actually went on to use that analogy about an alien attack in a speech to the United Nations, where he said, quote, "Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognise this common bond. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war?" Apparently, Reagan's staff rolled their eyes when he started talking about what they pejoratively referred to as little green men, but good on him for raising the subject, because I'm pretty sure Ronald Reagan was briefed into what we now know is the legacy UAP retrieval and reverse engineering program, and so was former President Obama after he was president. In 2021, former President Barack Obama told James Corden, quote, "When I came into the office, I was like, all right, is there a lab somewhere where we're keeping the alien specimens and spaceship? And you know, they did a little bit of research, and the answer was no." And I'm telling you, President Obama was lied to. Think about that again. A commander-in-chief of the United States of America was willfully lied to by people within the defense and intelligence community about just what it is that the United States has hidden away in private facilities, possibly within the confines of a private aerospace company. What Obama has said is, I'm being serious here, is that there is footage and records of objects in the skies that we don't know exactly what they are. We can't explain how they moved, their trajectory. They did not have an easily explainable pattern. Now, that was a profound comment for a former president to make, and especially in the context of what I know is that apparently President Obama sought and received a top-secret SCI briefing on the UAP issue after he was president. He wasn't briefed while he was president. But it's quite profound. I think Obama, probably more than any other president, has come close to admitting that there really is something to this mystery. Now, let's get to Trump. As former President Trump has acknowledged, one of the questions he's been getting asked the most on the campaign trail is what the government really knows about UFOs and UAPs. And this isn't the only time he's talked about this. In the final weeks again of the last 2020 election campaign, he was asked by his son, Don Trump Jr., if he would ever tell the public about the alleged 1947 Roswell incident. And I think what President Trump said at the time was very telling. It was a very clearly pre-organised Q&A. There was a bit of a nudge, nudge, wink, wink. He knew the question was coming and he couldn't help himself. He had this ironic smile on his lips as he answered, and Don Trump was practically giggling behind the camera. And President Trump said, "I won't talk to you about what I know about it, but it's very interesting." Now, that's one hell of a hint from then President Trump. So in October 2020, Trump also pledged that he also would take a good, strong look at the government program on UFOs. And this came shortly after the Pentagon had announced a task force in 2020 to investigate the subject. He's a bit of a tease, Trump, because sometimes he feigns complete indifference to the subject of UAPs, UFOs. I suspect because he's frightened of the Kucinich phenomenon. He's frightened of the public blowback if he admits what I suspect to be the case, which is that he's actually intensely interested in the subject. And that's belied by the fact that he had that curious exchange with his son, Don Jr. And let's not forget also what happened in December 2020. I think this is one of the very interesting roadblocks or roadmarks along the way. Haim Eshed, a very, very well-respected, very senior former head of the Israeli Defense Ministry's Space Directorate, in December 2020 gave an interview to a Hebrew newspaper where he claimed that aliens have asked for it not to be published that they are here on this planet because, quote, humanity is not ready yet. And Mr. Eshed also claimed that President Trump knew of the existence of these aliens on this planet and that he was on the verge of revealing the details but was asked not to do so because of concerns from within the Pentagon and the intelligence community of mass public hysteria. How blooming condescending if that's really the case, why we're not being told this full story. Is it really the case that the public would get hysterical if we learned about the existence of a non-human intelligence? I really strongly doubt that. To put what we're talking about here today in context, multiple presidents have promised over many, many decades to get to the bottom of the UAP mystery, and all of them have failed miserably. And that's why I think we really should take what former President Trump is saying with a huge grain of salt. As early as 1948, President Truman ordered oral briefings on a weekly basis to be given to him by the US Air Force because he was concerned that the spate of UFO sightings over the country at that time were a national security threat and an issue that he needed to be across as president. So coming back to Trump, Lex Fridman interviewed Donald Trump in September this year, and he asked Trump, "A lot of people are interested in footage of UFOs. Will you help push the Pentagon to release more footage, which a lot of people claim is available?" And Trump answered, "Oh yeah, sure, I would do that. I'd love to do that. I have to do that." And he also promised to release classified documents on the JFK assassination. Well, look, frankly, I'm not holding my breath, but I do think the public should hold Mr. Trump to his promise if he does become president. In another appearance on the Hewitt podcast in September last year, former President Trump admitted he was formally briefed on UFOs during his time as president. And I've heard this as well, that he sought and received what I'm told was a very limited briefing on what the US actually does know about UFOs. But I'm told he was briefed into the fact that the US has retrieved non-human technology, craft, and that there is an active reverse engineering program underway. Now, he's also acknowledged that he's spoken to pilots, and I think sometimes this is used to muddy the waters, to suggest that the only briefing that he ever received was from pilots who told him about incidents like the Nimitz incident from 2004, where a swarm of UFOs were seen around a US battleship carrier fleet. That's not the case. This was a formal briefing that the president was given at the time. In June this year, Donald Trump told Logan Paul that he has access to UFO files after being asked about what information he had about the existence of alien life. And there's a lot of skepticism about that because, frankly, his security clearances were curtailed quite stringently by President Biden after the appalling recklessness with which he dealt with very secret files, top secret SCI files at Mar-a-Lago. And that, of course, led to the FBI raid and the subsequent attempts to prosecute former President Trump for keeping hold of files that he'd denied having possession of. But in the course of that interview with Logan Paul, Trump was asked, "Am I a believer? No, I probably can't say that I am. But I have met with people that are serious people that say there are some really strange things that they see flying out there. They have people that are very smart and very solid who've said they believe there was something out there. And, you know, it makes sense that they could be. I've never been convinced, even despite that, you know. For some reason, it's not my thing. But a lot of people believe that it's true. A lot of very good, solid people believe it's true." Now, I do not for a moment believe that Trump is in any doubt whatsoever about the reality of the non-human intelligences engaging with our planet, because I know that he's been briefed about it. And I think what's happening is he's terrified of putting a foot wrong and finding himself again facing the accusation that he has breached national security constraints by revealing what he was given a briefing about by a very, very closed group of people. Now, he also was asked, when he was asked about aliens, he said that he'd spoken to Air Force personnel who claimed to see aircraft round in form going like 4 or 5 times faster than my super jet fighter plane. I think he's referring to the F-22. And I mean, a lot of what President Trump has said about this is contradictory at times, but pressed on whether he had access to information on alien life and UAPs by Logan Paul, Trump actually replied, "I have access, and I speak to people about it. I've actually had meetings on it, and they will tell you there's something going on." So I do think we have to be extremely careful with promises made by any presidential candidate that they're going to release the UFO files. I don't know what they tell these guys when they get into power, but what I'm told with the Democrat side of things is that the decision was made by Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor to the president, President Biden, that because the Schumer amendment didn't pass in December of 2023, the subject of potential disclosure of UAP information would be put on the shelf, on the back burner for another year or so. They didn't want to have this as an election issue throughout 2024. So for the current president, Joe Biden, and for Kamala Harris, it's been a non-issue, and she's made absolutely no comment about this on the campaign trail because the weak-kneed, flibbity-gibbet, soft, toffee-nosed lick-spittles that constitute the mainstream media have completely failed to ask the question. But Trump's an enigma. Watch him closely. He knows something. I know he knows something. I know he's been briefed, and he wants to talk about it. And it is very much part of his theme to break down the bulwarks of the dark state. If there really is a cover-up that's lied to consecutive presidents about the truth on UAPs, I suspect Donald Trump might very well want to be the president that breaks that story wide open. Thanks very much for joining Reality Check. And heaven help us, good luck in the election. Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And please don't forget to click that red subscribe button to ensure you get more of NewsNation's unbiased and fact-driven news coverage.